Welcome to Byte-Sized Tech, where we like to take a deep dive into the tech trends and gadgets that are really grabbing our attention this week.
Sounds fun.
Yeah, I think we've got some pretty interesting stuff to dig into today.
Looking forward to it.
AI infrastructure, drone market competition, and some big changes happening over at Google Search.
Yeah, it's funny how those three things almost sound like they're from totally different worlds.
Yeah.
But, when you dig into the articles that you sent over the sources, there are some really fascinating kind of connections and maybe even some potential conflicts brewing.
All right, well, let's jump right in then, and we'll start with this quote from Alibaba's chairman, Josiah. Right? He was talking at a conference in Hong Kong, and he had some pretty strong words about a potential bubble forming around AI data centers.
Yeah, when you think about Josiah's perspective, like he was there, back during the dot-com boom and bust, and I think that gives him a unique perspective on this kind of frenzy of investment that we're seeing.
He even used the phrase incredible amounts of money.
Right, it's not just a little bit of money we're talking about here, like tens of billions of dollars being poured into these data centers just by the big U.S. tech giants like Amazon, Microsoft, Google. It's mind-boggling.
And then you layer on top of that even more ambitious figures like OpenAI and SoftBank, potentially dropping $500 billion with a T dollars into U.S. data centers.
Just crazy.
And even Alibaba themselves are talking about north of $50 billion in investments.
Yeah, it really makes you wonder, is this sustainable? Will all this spending actually translate into profitable services? That was the question that Josiah really kind of put out there.
Yeah, and some of the analysis that you sent over definitely reflects that investor anxiety.
Yeah.
There's definitely some jitters around, is this actually going to pan out, or is this another bubble getting ready to burst?
Right, and I thought that Mizuho analysis was really interesting because they were kind of hinting that these comments from Chinese tech leaders, they might not just be about economics.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, they were suggesting that maybe there's a little bit of strategic posturing going on here. Maybe even some pot shots directed at NVIDIA and this whole narrative of U.S. AI dominance.
So you're saying like after GTC, which is NVIDIA's big, GPU technology conference.
Yeah.
Where they're, trotting out their latest and greatest AI hardware and software.
Exactly.
Maybe there's a little bit of, gamesmanship going on here.
They're feeling a little bit threatened.
So how does this tie into the bigger geopolitical picture then? Are we looking at this massive infrastructure buildup as part of like a larger contest between China and the U.S. for leadership in AI?
Yeah, it's easy to kind of frame it that way, but one of your sources made a really good point that the Chinese tech sector, it's not a monolith, right? Different companies have different strategies, different goals.
Right.
But at the same time, you can't ignore the fact that there's been this explosion of new AI models coming out of China. Just in the last couple of weeks, after DeepSeek launched their model, there have been, 10 more new models?
Yeah.
So clearly something's happening there.
And it seems like they're not necessarily trying to just, match the U.S. in terms of raw processing power, right? They're taking a different tack.
Totally. And I think part of this is driven by those U.S. restrictions on the highest-end NVIDIA chips. Remember the ones we were talking about?
Yeah.
Instead of trying to just replicate that same kind of infrastructure-heavy approach, Chinese firms are really leaning into their engineering talent.
Interesting.
They're finding ways to build models that are still incredibly capable, that can compete on a global scale, but maybe they don't require quite the same level of spending on data centers and raw computing power.
So it's almost like those restrictions might be inadvertently fostering a different kind of innovation in China?
It's a possibility for sure.
Leading to a more diverse and competitive global AI ecosystem.
Yeah, because if these models are actually more efficient and cheaper to run, that could really put pressure on everyone else's profit margins, right?
Yeah, totally. Let's shift gears a bit, though. Let's
Yeah.
go from, the digital backbone of AI to something a little bit more tangible up in the skies, drones.
Oh, yeah.
I love this quote from Adam Bry, who's the CEO of Skydio. He was talking about how drones have gone from being toys to tools to now actually becoming part of our essential infrastructure.
That's a really interesting progression.
But I found really fascinating in the articles you sent was this idea of autonomous drone systems with their own docking stations.
Like little drone airports.
Yeah, essentially imagine you've got drones stationed all over a city and they can just launch themselves when needed.
Yeah. Respond to a 911 call, a fire, traffic accident.
Right.
Provide real-time aerial footage to first responders. It could be a game changer.
Right, and this is where that competition between U.S. and Chinese drone makers really comes into play, especially in these critical public safety applications.
Exactly. You know, what's interesting is that a lot of the early drone technology really came out of consumer electronics and like the world of radio-controlled aircraft, which historically was heavily dominated by Chinese manufacturers.
Ah, so they had a head start.
Yeah, they had a big head start in those initial consumer and early commercial drone markets.
So why is it so important then to have strong U.S. drone companies in this space?
No.
I mean, it's got to be more than just market share, right?
Oh, absolutely. When you're talking about drones potentially becoming integrated into our infrastructure, inspecting bridges, monitoring power lines, providing
This
security,
is the critical stuff.
you have to think about the data security, the national security, the cybersecurity risks, and that's why having trusted domestic options is so important.
Right, and it seems like Skydio kind of saw this coming. They made a conscious decision early on to focus on AI and autonomy and to manufacture in the U.S. right from the get-go.
Yeah, initially it was all about product quality, but now it looks like a really savvy strategic move.
They've shipped close to 50,000 drones, and they've got a significant chunk of a market in those enterprise segments like public safety and energy.
They're not messing around.
So they're kind of positioning themselves as this like U.S. underdog that's taking on the giants in the field.
Yeah, and they're doing it by focusing on what the U.S. is really good at, that cutting-edge AI, that software, the brains of the operation.
Yeah, and it sounds like Adam Bry is actually pretty optimistic about both the current and previous administrations recognizing the importance of this competition with China.
He seems to think that there are enough tech-savvy people in government now to really understand the stakes.
All right, let's bring it back down to earth for our last topic, Google search.
Oh, yeah.
You sent over some fascinating pieces about Elizabeth Reed, who's the new head of search, and she's bringing this really experimental mindset from her time leading Google Maps.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting to see how that plays out.
One of the things that really surprised me was learning that Google employees were pushing for generative AI in search, even before ChatGPT hit the scene.
Yeah, apparently there were these internal teams that were really excited about this technology, but they faced a lot of resistance from higher ups.
Why would they be hesitant? It seems like a no-brainer, right?
Well, you have to remember that Google's existing search business model, the one based on those traditional search ads, it's been a cash cow for them for years, and there was this real fear of disrupting that.
Right.
Plus, there are these huge concerns about maintaining accuracy and reliability. Google has this reputation for providing high-quality search results, and they're under a lot more scrutiny than a startup.
Yeah, so it's this classic innovator's dilemma, right? You're so successful with your current model that it's hard to embrace something new that might disrupt it.
Exactly. And you can imagine how frustrating it must have been for those internal teams to see other companies running with ideas that they had been developing.
Absolutely. So now the big question is, how do they monetize this new AI-powered search experience, right?
Yeah.
How do you integrate ads into these AI overviews without making it feel clunky or compromising the quality of the results?
Yeah, and they're experimenting with different approaches, trying to figure out that balance, but it's still early days.
And even though their market share hasn't really taken a hit, yet some analysts are starting to wonder if their future growth might start to level off.
Which is a big deal for a company that's been growing as consistently as Google has.
Huge. And then there's the impact on publishers to consider.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
They rely so heavily on traffic from Google search. And there's this real worry that these AI overviews, which often provide direct answers to user queries, might reduce the number of people actually clicking through to their websites.
Which would mean less ad revenue for them.
Exactly. So Google is in this really tricky position. They need to innovate to stay ahead of the curve, but they also need to figure out how to do it in a way that doesn't undermine their core business or hurt the broader online ecosystem.
Yeah, it's a tough balancing act.
So we've covered a lot of ground today, from the massive investments in AI infrastructure and the geopolitical dynamics at play to the fierce competition in the drone market and the fundamental shifts happening with Google search. It's clear that we're living through a really transformative time in tech.
Totally. And I think the sources that you sent over really highlight how complex and interconnected all of these developments are.
All right, well, that's about all the time we have for this week's Deep Dive. Thanks for joining us.
It's been a pleasure.
And for all of you listening out there, thanks for tuning in to Byte-Sized Tech. If you enjoyed the show, be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe for more fun tech discussions.
Yeah.
And as you go about your week, think about this. With all this money pouring into AI infrastructure, the strategic importance of drones, and the changes happening with search, what future shifts in the tech world are you most excited or maybe even a little apprehensive about? It's something to ponder as we watch these stories continue to unfold.